Good afternoon. My name is Ahmed Gaber. I'm honored to be the moderator of this session. The session title is How to Attract Private Funding into the Sector and what is a good BBB project. We have I think Ayman Ayad will be here in a minute. We have 5 panelists, and I'm honored to be the private sector participation or projects in the water industry would mean to some big desalination plant, 100,000 cubic meters somewhere. And maybe some will remember the concession or the BBB project in the New Cairo. It's a wastewater treatment plant. But I would say mapping opportunities for private sector in the water industry goes much beyond that. Water treatment, not necessarily in Egypt, in many African countries, would be smaller water treatment plants to serve certain surface area. Wastewater treatment, not necessarily the wastewater treatment in the traditional way. In some countries, it would mean fecal sludge treatment, and the size of 5,000 cubic meter per day for treatment fecal sludge will be a decent size for a community. In addition, we know that worldwide we are talking about energy neutral wastewater treatment plants. Mean that the sludge, like in Jabal Asfar, would be used as a feedstock to anaerobic digestion and we produce electricity and what we call digestate. We sell the digestate as liquid or dried, and we have electricity that could be recycled to the same treatment plant like in Jabal al-Asfar. Then we have, I believe, a lot of projects for private sector to get to the domain of sludge to resources, and I insist, not sludge to electricity or to energy. It is more of a sludge to resources, and this might open a lot of opportunities to the private sector. Water loss reduction is a big issue worldwide and in our part of the world. And high value water that have been produced using whatever kind of technology, 30 to 40% got lost in the networks in some countries, some cities. the private sector in many parts of the world get into concessions and get an agreement or a project formulated around the private sector, will go to the field of what I call demand management, that we control the demand or control the losses in the water networks. Another example related to energy efficiency. The water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants in Egypt, in the region, in many countries, are operated far from the efficiency optimal. The private sector in some countries get to this business by signing agreements with the municipality or the company to reduce the losses in energy and share the profit, because it's, again, is a win-win if we manage as private sector to get into this business. In the previous session, I learned myself from the discussion what Atar Hanoura was talking about, that the most important thing in a triple P project is risk allocation. And he's bringing our attention that in comparing a triple P with the EPC, we have to have a measure different from the absolute numbers that you might think of. Also, if you remember, the point of scale has been brought in, because for some reason, private sector participation would mean for many of us big projects. The 500,000 cubic meter wastewater treatment plant or 100,000 cubic meter desal plant. It is not like that. I think it might be the opportunity for the private sector, not necessarily the big companies, to go to the business for small scale projects. It has been brought to our attention several times during the last few days the importance of good planning and good project delivery methods. I think collectively we had learned a lot about bits and pieces of what I call the critical success factor to make a good project for both the private sector and the government. At this point, I wish to start with my first panelist, and the way we are going to do it, I'm going to address a specific question to one of my guest panelists, and if you feel like you want to deviate from the phrasing of the question, please feel free. The Orascom is represented today by Engineer Karim Salama. Ahlan wa sahlan, Karim. And the question, we know all that Orascom, they executed the first, and maybe till this minute, the only triple B project in New Cairo, the wastewater treatment plant. And I visited the plant about a couple of months ago. Then a lot of memories is still fresh in my mind about the plant. And the question that, since you guys implemented this New Cairo wastewater treatment plant, we are sure that there are some lessons that you learned that might behoove you, encourage you to look for number 2 or number 3, and maybe there are some lessons there that will make you hesitant about making the adventure again. Would you explain to us, Karim, the lessons learned by Orascom in the new Cairo wastewater treatment project, and maybe we can decide together about the future.
First of all, thank you. It's my pleasure to be part of this panel. Actually, as you have correctly mentioned, Orasqualia is the first PPP project, and for now the only one in Egypt. I was honored to be part of the team developing Orasqualia. And till now, there are lessons learned from Orasqualia for the fact being the first PPP in Egypt. Also, due to the fact of the occurrence of various events, we have lived two revolutions, the devaluation. So the main takeaway from Orasqualia is the necessity of having a dynamic, balanced contract, which means that there is a proper risk allocation between the parties. So, and this is actually is reached in a way or another in the PPP contract of Orasqualia. The risk assignment should be allocated properly to the party that is suitable to deal with such risk. And also meaning by dynamic that we know that the lifetime of a project in a concession is between 20 to 30 years. So there are some risks that we cannot undermine and we cannot forecast that might evolve with the changes, whether in the economic, political circumstances of the country. And as an example for such risks, we can speak on a couple that we have faced in Orasqualia, like the force majeure. Before 2011, no one was looking thoroughly at the clauses of the force majeure, considering that it's a remote risk. And there was always one categorization was one kind of reliefs and compensation for the contract under force majeures. Now, after 2011, and in a lot of contracts, whether in Egypt or in the neighboring country, we can see that there is a categorization for force majeure of being governmental force majeures and natural force majeures. And even after the last year pandemic, there was also, the COVID is considered as a natural force majeure. However, the regulations imposed by the government at this time were dealt with as a change in law, which enabled the private sector to have a proper relief over the lifetime of the project. So this is something that we have learned from Orasqualia that was a bit missing due to the fact that this was a project at the time when everything was very constant. The second issue that we have learned the hard way was the currency risk. Orasqualia is an EGP-based project with a foreign investment coming from our partners, Spanish partners Aqualia. So no one in 2011 or 2008 was thinking that we might face the devaluation of the EGP, but eventually the devaluation has impacted enormously in a very adverse effect our returns and for us and for our partners. And the fact that the contract was not giving a direct protection of this risk was a bit of a risk that was not fully mitigated for the private sector. And the final take is that there should be a presence for a sponsor or a contract regulator from the government side, because still the procurers are more used to the culture of EPC contracts. And till the parties are able to understand and acknowledge the importance of working together for the success of the projects, there is struggle in solving a lot of problems. And this role was led by the PPP Central Unit and they are still doing such role in a very successful way, being the contract regulator to try to liaise between the parties, solve any bottlenecks, to reach a common ground and understanding and keep the success of the project. And thankfully, Orasqualia is still till now one of the successful precedents for the PPP in Egypt.
Okay. Thank you. I think this is definitely the risk forecasting and the force majeure and the currency risk that you mentioned. But let me share with our audience an observation that when I visited the plant a couple of months ago, as someone who had visited God knows how many wastewater treatment plants in this country and everywhere, I have noticed that the plant is designed and operated as close as possible to the optimal level. In other words, the private sector wouldn't spend one extra Egyptian pound in something that's not needed. I was giving the example of even selecting the rails or the type of tiles or the design of a building or the design of a tank. Everything, in my opinion, was done just as if you had done the best value engineering I can imagine that have been done. No luxury whatsoever. In comparison, in many plants that in Egypt and wherever, you might notice that selecting the material of construction or even the fence around the plant, the designer or maybe the contractor maybe go from that point of value engineered to beyond, make it more fancy, luxurious, take a higher factor of safety. I just want to mention that because when the private sector, this is a design, build, operate. This is, everything was done by you guys. I think the private sector will put the extra effort to save as much as you can of money. This facility has an anaerobic digestion plant for sludge to convert the sludge to electricity, but never put in operation. It is not working. And if I will ask Rasqualia or Orascom why you are not operating a waste-to-energy facility that's already built 11 years ago, I know the answer. Because as a clever private sector, they made the calculation. If they put it in operation versus not, would it made, where is the money? And because in this particular case, it is more profitable not to put into the facility, the digester is still there. It is not in operation. But again, I would say, I'm not saying this in the bad way. I'm saying it that as in the session, last session, the private sector has to make every effort to make the calibration to minimize the expenses. Do you have another answer?
If I may comment on this, that we have to be the. The beauty of the PPP contracts is that it's output based.
Yes.
So it's not like an EPC contract that it's input based and you have a specific specifications that you have to follow. It's at the end an output based that there is a certain parameters that you need to reach at the end, and this is where the payment is coming from. So it gives the private sector to reach the most optimum way to be because at the end we are in a bid. So I want to be the least price and at the same time with the most profitability and maintain the quality of my service over the 20 years of concessions. And at the end I have an obligation when I'm handing over the plan to the government, because this is not a BOO, it's a BOOT, so I transferred the facility at the end to the government, need to be transferred in a proper way and in a certain category that enabled them to work it out for a lifetime of the project, which is more than 60 years.
Yes.
So regarding the point of the digesters, there was also something that was mentioned by Engineer Ater in the last session, that was part of that disabled us from putting the digesters into operation since the beginning of the operation of the plant, is that the flow that we were receiving was a bit low. So not going into technical details, but the level of contamination and the flow and so was not enabling us to have the digesters in working and in operation. And this is one of the important risks to avail influence and the influence with the qualities without affecting the private sector.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Now, I wish to ask Omar Hosni. Omar from Walad Allam. And we, of course, have Walad Allam are very well known as one of the top-notch EPC contractors in the water and wastewater sector and other sectors as well. And we know that you are now making the shift towards the private sector participation and this kind of projects. And we wish to know how you will base your decision, or what are the critical factors based on which you will decide to go into a BBB project.
Thank you all for inviting me today, and I'm honored to be part of this panel. Well, I would like to start by telling you that, of course, you may know that Hassan Allam has been in the EPC business for quite a bit of time in Egypt and abroad, and our interest spans beyond just the EPC. So in 2018, Hassan Allam created a special company dedicated to concession type projects. And by concession type projects, of course, PPP falls under this umbrella as well. And if we would like to compare from a certain perspective EPC to PPP in terms of how we see it, I think an interesting analogy would be looking at preparing for, let's say, a short sprint run compared to preparing for a marathon. And I mean that in a way, well, I'm not the most athletic in the room, so maybe it's not the best analogy coming from me, but however, when you prepare for a short run, the life cycle of the run is short, so that it's easier to quantify the risks, it's easier to identify the boundary conditions surrounding the project, and the decision is relatively easy to move forward. However, when you look at preparing for a marathon, it requires stamina, it requires momentum, it requires persistence, it requires some sort of sustainability. I think, Dr. Ahmed, you touched base on something that is very important. The involvement of private sector, as you said, and as my colleague Karim said, in such projects, you don't just build the project and deliver it. You develop the project, you raise the funds required for both debt and equity, and then you operate the project, and at the end, you either decommission or you hand over the project depending on the terms of the project. And the involvement of the private sector ensures that the quality of the operation is run in a way that makes sure that the project remains profitable, achieves the required returns, is able to pay back the debt. So in brief, I think the main key word that everybody touched base on is that the project needs to be bankable. So the decision to pursue such a project is that the project has to be bankable, basically. And I mean, I come from an energy background, as you have seen in my title, and I think Egypt has gained a lot of experience and went through a very important learning curve in the energy sector when it comes to participation between the public and the private sector. If we look at the feed-in tariff program, if we look at the BOO projects in which Hassan Allam is already involved, As I said, we created Hassan Allam Utilities with the aim to get into this business, and we believe that the partnerships we're creating today, so Hassan Allam Utilities works in energy, in water, in transport and logistics, so in infrastructure in general, and in each of those pillars we try to create the right partnerships with the know-how providers, both locally and internationally, that enables Hassan Allam to be geared and capable of handling such project on its own in the future. So there is an element of knowledge transfer in there, and I think this is a key for growth. And as Egypt is an emerging market, I think there is a lot of room for this. I mean, there is, as you said, there are a lot of opportunities out there, and the opportunities do not need to strictly be restricted to a certain scale or size. Of course, different companies have different appetite when it comes to project sizes, but we are designing, we designed the company just to tackle this type of business, and we are currently bidding for projects both in Egypt and outside Egypt, in water and in other infrastructure projects as well.
Are you limiting your scope or interest to the famous desal and wastewater treatment, or you can go to energy efficiency, sludge to resources, as I...
Actually, not at all. We're not limiting it at all. One of the key streams we're working on, which is still, it's still in development, is waste to energy in general. And that's not limited to waste to energy resulting from wastewater treatment, but also other forms of waste to energy. But of course, there are a lot of factors that play a role in whether the project moves on or not, and one of them being the regulatory framework and how the regulatory framework supports such projects, I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is the idea of establishing a company, your utilities company, and to with this strategy, I think definitely very important for us to know. Now, let me invite Karim Badr, الصندوق السيادي. I was telling Karim that I was very anxious to see الصندوق السيادي, and luckily enough we have Karim with us, because I think among many that we're really interested about the intentions of الصندوق السيادي to what you really want to do or plan to do in the water and the wastewater sector. I read yesterday that you already tendered 16 desal plants. Rumors, it was written in one of those early morning emails that tells you what's going on in the whole country. But I mean, I think all of us are keen to know what you have in mind. What is the plan, especially in water and wastewater sector, and especially this part related to, we're talking about BBB, and you are the صندوق السيادي, that how you see it?
No, thank you, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I think, first of all, the news that you've read is not true, so just we wanted to make that very clear. It was taken out of context. However, we are very interested in the desalination and the water sector. The role of the Sovereign Fund of Egypt is to attract foreign direct investment into Egypt. It is to entice the private sector to greater participation in the Egyptian economy. And then finally, to bring new blood into Egypt. And this sometimes needs a holding hand, sometimes needs a partner that allows comfort, that gives the idea that the government has skin in the game as well. They're not just on their own. And accordingly, we are an investment arm. We are set up as a special law kind of quasi-governmental entity that really, its role is to co-invest alongside the private sector. We are a minority investor. We are not a majority investor. We are not a technical kind of partner. We are primarily a financial investor. And the idea is to partner with local partners like Hassan Allam and Orascom, to partner with regional players and international players to allow them to have the comfort that the government is there, that to bridge the gap that exists sometimes between the developer and the financial investor and the technical element of the government. Specifically, when it comes to desalination, I think we lobbied over the last 18 months, and I joined Ayman in a number of conferences, and we had several discussions among the big water players in Egypt. I think the idea was that water was traditionally financed through EPC contracts, and we wanted to change that. Qualia was one of a kind, but unfortunately it did not see replica deals afterwards. So what we wanted to do is to bring in the private sector. The government has put a very ambitious plan to develop 2.8 million cubic meters over 17 plants in the next 5 years. And this needs a lot of investments. That's roughly $2.5 billion of investment. So the government does not need to do this from its own money on an EPC basis. That puts a huge burden on its balance sheet. So we were successful to lobby that these should be done through the private sector. However, we wanted to attract as much as possible a number of developers and investors. Hassan Allam and Orascom are Egyptian. We are very proud of these institutions in Egypt, but the mandate is also to bring foreign direct investment. So we do not just want local players, we want international players as well. And some of these have never been investing in Egypt before. Specifically, as Omar said and Karim, it's a long-term kind of investment. It's a 25-year kind of horizon. And to do so, you need to have proper, risk profile. You need to have proper structure. You need to have proper risk mitigation. And accordingly, if they're going to come in and invest in Egypt, if an entity like the Sovereign Fund holds a minority stake alongside them, this gives a lot of comfort. This allows them to come in and say, okay, we are happy to take that risk. We are happy to enter Egypt. And once they're in, they will continue to be in. So I think at the end, we are there to provide support when it comes to structuring and putting these products in the form of desalination plants into the light. And I think desalination is the start, and that will trickle down to wastewater and water treatment to be done under the partnership with the private sector. And then eventually, once these private sector players have identified the opportunities, have put their bids, have won these concessions, then we will come in, step in, and become a co-investor alongside them to give them an equal opportunity to compete and bring the best technical and financial values.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Karim. I just want to address another dimension, because I think we can broadly classify the projects to extremely attractive, less attractive, depending on all the criteria that all of us know about what can make a project attractive, financial, risk, etc. In the desal and wastewater treatment maybe would be the most attractive. I'm talking about projects that are less attractive, although we know that the economic return on investment may be high, like the energy efficiency or rural sanitation or water loss reduction, which is a major issue in Egypt. Would you guys be interested to go to those areas that not necessarily the most attractive BBB projects?
Definitely. I think we have a developmental role as much as an investment role. And I think if there is the right opportunity, if there is the right setup for us to be involved in something like this, then definitely. We are not technical, so we do not really entice a certain direction. However, we work with the different ministries that are responsible for the different elements in the Egyptian economy, and we provide the support when it comes to investment, when it comes to structuring and so forth. So for example, if waste to energy is on the high list of the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Electricity, then definitely this is something that we can work together on and develop a product similar to what happened with desalination. Desalination was not really open for the private sector. Most of the desalination plants were built under an EPC basis owned by the government.
Right.
So it's really our role to avail new products and to allow the private sector to fund them. And yeah, so desalination is just one of them, and many other fields in the infrastructure and others have been tapped by the sovereign fund in order to maximize the benefit from the private sector.
Wonderful. This dimension of the developmental role of the Sanduq Siyadi, I think this is what most of us would like to hear, because I think this is what will make it different, because this is I'm sure a lot of investing entities will be interested, but not necessarily with this developmental interest. This is what I wish to emphasize. Thank you very much. Now I wish to invite Wasila Dridi from the African Development Bank. And the question that I think you have, Wasila, you have a presentation that you want to share?
Yes.
Okay, we are ready.
Thank you. Do I need to push something? No, I know.
Okay.
Hello? Okay. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the floor, and thanks to our partners today from the European Union for really joining forces and allow us to all gather today to speak about this extremely important subject, I would say, and timely public-private partnerships. Okay, sorry. Thank you. So maybe to introduce myself, I'm a principal investment officer at the bank. I cover the continent for mainly public-private partnerships in water and sanitation across the continent. And we've been closely watching the market in Egypt and really wanted to today present a bit the financial instruments that we have at the bank that are available for the private sector as well as the public sector to promote a sustainable development of water and sanitation infrastructure. This pointer is supposed to be towards here. Okay, it's fine otherwise. All right, anyway, it's fine. Okay, now it's over already. I guess I'll do without the slides otherwise. Okay, can you just lead the presentation? Okay. So one of the window that's a bit less known, I would say broadly, about the African Development Bank is its private window. The African Development Bank has indeed a public window and a private window. The private window is available for private sector entities, but also publicly owned entities that are acting independently and that are self-sustainable. And here I think I want to put this really into context, because a few comments have been provided here and there about sort of the private sector wanting to maximize its profits and obviously the public sector wanting to have the lowest cost. I think no one would be here talking about public-private partnerships if public debt was infinite, you know. But this is a reality we have to deal with. The governments and each of our regional member countries have to address all their needs in terms of investments. And it's not only water and sanitation, it's transport, it's education, it's health. It's not just water and sanitation. So the fact that those resources are limited is the very reason why everyone is now tending to public-private partnerships. So of course, we don't look at the projects in the same way when we look at public debt versus private debt. And this is why when we consider public-private partnerships, we obviously need additional resources and additional securities to make sure that the project is bankable, as our colleague from Orascom was mentioning earlier. And I think this is really something to have in mind, because it's also why obviously the pricing is different. Earlier, our colleague from the Ministry of Housing and from CAPO were mentioning that we cannot price the same way public debt that basically will be looking at the risk profile of Egypt as a country and compare it to the public the risk profile of a private entity. It's completely different. And so this is really why the pricing is different, the securities that we're looking at are different, and the study that we make on the risk profile of a given transaction is extremely different. And also, because we're here with other colleagues from other African countries, I think it's also worth mentioning that we are seeing globally that there is a tendency for decentralization. In Egypt, for now, most of the PPPs have been handled at the national level. But in many countries, the responsibility of water and sanitation services has trickled down to municipalities. And this obviously also impacts the risk profile in a given transaction. Next, please. Next, please. So the African Development Private Sector Window provides project finance, which is, I think, at the heart of the public-private partnerships that we're discussing today. It also provides corporate loans to private companies, as well as technical assistance, which is used obviously for private preparation to finance some of the much-needed studies, to actually develop and prepare and be prepared also to rightfully assess the offers that will come in a bid for PPP. And finally, guarantees. And obviously we also, because of the size of the bank, its AAA rating and its presence also in many countries, we are in capacity to provide funding in local and hard currency. Next, please. So our colleague from Metito earlier mentioned the Kigali bulk water supply, which is one of the most known PPPs across the continent because of its scale and the duration of the concession. And I wanted to sort of get back to this project from a financier's perspective because we tend to look at the PPP only and the concession agreement itself. But for the sake of the status of the PPPs that we're discussing now in Egypt, I think it's quite interesting to look at it as a whole and look at what came into the preparation and the execution of this project. So the project involves a concession of 27 years. Like our colleague from Metito who mentioned, it's sometimes longer than marriages. Its capacity is for 40,000 cubical meter per day, and it was financed by the African Development Bank, EAIF, IFC, and FMO, with a total project cost of about $80 million. Can you please go to the next slide? So what I want to add on this project is not only the financing that went to the project. There was a need for upstream work, and we sometimes tend to forget, when we look at PPPs, what is the extra layers that one needs to do for a PPP to actually be efficient. And this was the case in Kigali. Rwanda had actually put in place the development of its supply network because building a plant, if you don't have a supply network that will allow the transportation of water to the end consumer is not going to really help anyone. And so as you can see, while the plant itself had a project cost of $80 million, the Kigali supply network actually costed way more. And so, for example, this is a transaction that needed to be financed through the sovereign debt and could not be taken on by a private entity. So what made this project feasible is the fact that, again, this was undertaken by the WASAC, which is the Water Sanitation Corporation in Kigali, but this entity didn't have a strong enough risk profile for a bank like ourselves or any other DFI to come in and be able to finance the project. And this is why the government of Rwanda put in a sovereign guarantee which allowed for this project to be bankable. We are quite often also facing the currency risk in PPP, depending on the project. Our colleague from the Sovereign Fund was mentioning foreign direct investments. Well, foreign direct investors need to ensure that they will be protected from the volatility of the local currency. And that's something extremely important that we face. And therefore, one of the solutions that is commonly adopted is to have a tariff paid in hard currency or blocked at a specific exchange rate. Then we have the much imported subject of tariff that was quite well covered earlier. But what I want to highlight, and I think it was, it's more and more needed for projects in our sector to be bankable, is the fact that more and more concessional funding are available. Some financiers can go even as far as providing grants, and those really help, I would say, bring the tariff at a sustainable level that can be afforded by the population, and those are not to be neglected. Finally, what obviously made the difference also in this transaction is the fact that we had a strong transaction advisor, IFC, which helped prepare for the tender, but also helped the public authorities maneuver through this quite difficult tender process that is required for a successful PPP. Next slide, please. So in short, we wanted to just go back a bit to what we see from the banking perspective to be some of the main important factors to have a successful PPP put in place. First and foremost, the political commitment is at the heart of this. We've discussed risk allocation, and without political and strong political commitment, the risk allocation is usually not where it needs to be. The team that is in charge of the PPP projects. And here we're talking from the public side. Very often, and I can quote many projects, even now in Uganda, Senegal, different countries, when there is a high turnover in the management team of a PPP project, the project just doesn't get off the floor and is extremely delayed. And so we want to highlight the importance of having strong and capable human resources working from the public side on these projects. The enabling environment, I think this was really covered in previous sessions. The transparency and competitive importance of the procurement process. We mentioned earlier the fact that for most of these projects, Egypt is fortunate enough to have strong local actors, but quite often those local actors partner up with international companies. And for these companies to be willing to invest their time and money, the procurement process has to be transparent and clear to all actors. The strong off-taker, I mentioned it on Kigali. This is the #1 thing that we look at from a banker's perspective. You know, the ability of the off-taker to really face its obligation. And so that's at the heart of the bankability of PPP. So I think, you know, if we had to summarize what makes or breaks a PPP, it's really the risk allocation. Risk allocation of inflow, risk allocation of the market demand, but also, you know, much more in the nitty-gritty details sometimes, allowing the permits to be delivered on time, to avoid the private companies to have to pay fees. Next. So these are a few informations on the guarantees that the African Development Bank provides. We provide the partial risk guarantee as well as a partial credit guarantee. And those are two tools that are quite useful for PPPs. And I want to maybe take a moment to go through what a partial credit guarantee is. Partial credit guarantee usually allows us to basically partner up with a local bank to provide local funding on a longer term than what is usually available at the market at a quite competitive pricing. Next, please, because I think I'm running out of time. So those are just a few examples that we wanted to present as they really have been instrumental in making some PPPs work in the energy sector in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wasila, for this very informative presentation. I already received a signal from one of the audience that he has some question if time would allow, but we will save this to later. And I think we have Mr. Marcos Martinez with us from EBRD. Do we? Yes. Well, all of us know the rich experience of EBRD worldwide, or let me say in Europe and in the region, in triple P projects. And we wish to know the EBRD plans for leveraging this great experience in our part of the world. And also we have heard about an initiative of the EBRD in Romania about the green bond related, and we wish to know if EBRD has plans to have something similar in Egypt. Please.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. And also apologize on behalf of my colleague Ali Hamza, who is the head of RO in Cairo, who should be with you sitting today, but he had an important issue to attend. My name is Marcos Martinez. I head the PPP advisory unit within EBRD. And I'm talking to you today from London, where the headquarters of EBRD are located. I've been in Cairo and in Egypt several times. I've been working in different PPP projects in Cairo and Egypt, and also in the region. I was involved in an equity investment, for example, together with our partners of Aqualia, who invested in New Cairo. I also look at Abu Rawash, and I have been very much involved in the 6th of October dry port in near Cairo. Answering your question, the experience of EBRD not only in Europe but also in Central Asia is that, and it has been said this morning quite a lot, projects need to be well prepared. Okay, for a project to succeed, you need to persevere, you need political commitment, as my colleague Wasila was saying, and you need time and do your homework. So our team work helping public sector, helping clients, working with PPCU, with Ater and his colleagues, and we help them in doing the homework. Okay, that the feasibility study is in place, that the information that the private sector requires in order to bid for these complex projects are in place, and that takes time and costs money. This is something that EBRD supports. So that, again, we are a partner of Egypt in general, and we are looking at helping Egypt in the development of water project as well. Regarding your second question on EBRD experience in Romania and what we have done in terms of financing the water sector, let me go quickly. I think I understand it's difficult to participate in a panel remotely, but I'll try to be short. EBRD started financing the water sector in Romania in 1995. Okay, at the time, it was an undeveloped sector, and we were financing the sector based on sovereign loans, so with direct recourse to the central government, but lending directly to ROCs. ROCs are regional water operation companies. So in Romania, the water sector is transferred to regions, and the service is delivered by these ROC companies, which are publicly owned. So we were lending to these companies with sovereign loans from the central government, and we were deploying a lot and significant amount of technical cooperation, technical assistance. That technical assistance was focused on improving the operational and financial management of those companies. And over time, those companies have been improved, okay? After that, instead of financing with direct recourse to the sovereign government, we were financing only to the recourse to the state company shareholders, that is the municipalities or the regions, the counties. It's true that the water sector and these ROCs in Romania benefit of having access, especially after 2000, to a lot of EU grants, which obviously allow them to improve their performance with a very low cost of capital. But eventually they have improved significantly, and now currently in the latest projects, we have just financing without recourse to any public entity, only to the balance sheet of these companies, because they have become very efficient and self-sustainable. We never have financed the water sector in Romania with a bond. It's something we look at, we explored in the past, but again, because of they have access to so much EU grants and EU funding, issuing a green bond, a water bond like we were exploring, probably will not make the case in Romania. There are similar experiences in Mexico, okay, where again, this is a national program of bonds to finance capital investment in the water sector for municipalities. But in the case of Romania, we thought the need of the bond will be not really very significant, really to be interesting for the government, for the market. Happy to explore something like that in Egypt. Happy to explore how to support this massive desalination program that we are looking together with the sovereign fund. And yeah, I'm happy, of course, to meet you and to participate in this panel and to answer any question that anybody might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I think this is definitely informative and answering the question that we wish that you to address. For the interest of the time, and I think we have a lot to discuss, let me invite Ayman Ayad to, I think you have a presentation you want to share, please.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. I'm Ayman Ayad. I'm the Water and Utilities Sector Manager in the EU delegation in Cairo. So I'll take you in a quick until the presentation is on screen. What I would like to explore or to present to you how a quick tour on how the EU structure with look into the past and our new, let's say, relative new financing modality, the European Fund for Sustainable Development, which is more directed towards the private sector participation. So historically, the traditional support mechanism from the EU side were under 4 pillars: technical assistance, twinning, sector budget support, and investment grants. I'm not going to dive into much detail, but to give you an example, the investment grant, which I'll explain later, are mainly directed to aim with the reduction of interest rate, cover investment gap for suboptimal but viable infrastructure, a delegated grant to a lead financing institution, whether European or international. We had also sector budget support, which is a direct disbursement to the state budget in exchange of set of reform benchmark. Some of them are technical by nature, and some are related to the general eligibility criteria, whether it be budgetary transparency, macroeconomic stability, parliamentarian oversight over the budget, and public finance management. The EU support goes throughout the whole project cycle management. So we provide assistance in the project screening, project identification, pre-feasibility studies, till the point of designing a program for the government, and also then providing an investment grant for the project implementation. This could come from a bilateral envelope, like in the case of Egypt, or from regional envelopes, as you can see in that screen. Currently, we have like 7 blending facilities across the world. In Africa, we have 3 that are now being encapsulated under one umbrella, what we call it in DG. So how our blending operation works, I mean, as I said, because we are a grant provider, we delegate the EU funds to a lead financing institution that are blended, non-earmarked, through a pari passu rate. Then this lead financing institution, whether it be EIB, KFW, and others, signs an agreement with the governments and implement through concessional funds. What are our priorities in that? Its objective is to improve project sustainability, quality, innovation, and speed, and to ensure that they are in line with EU policies. That's a quick diagram to explain what we look at from the EU perspective to provide as a justification for the EU grant. So we look into the difference between the capex cost and the cost recovery, the additional requirements from the EU side, whether it's on the environmental side or other innovative elements in the project. And based on these analysis, we reach the maximum potential grant size that the EU could contribute to a specific project. This varies, of course, depending on the sector, but a rule of thumb could be of a leverage of 1 to 10, so 10 to 15% from the project cost. But all this, what we call OED finance, is not sufficient because the world is changing, huge challenges across the globe that even exacerbated with the COVID-19 pandemic that required a new approach, what we Commissioner Valieri mentioned, from billions to trillions. So how to crowd in the private sector. And that's why the concept of Team Europe initiative was created, which aims at taking an integrated approach, combining resources from EU and its member states and European financial institutions to help address challenges with our partner country, face to face. This will be done through guarantees, investment grants, and technical assistance. So this tool, the European Fund for Sustainable Development, aims to contribute to sustainable development, encourage private investment with a focus on jobs and growth, improve investment climate, and tackle root cause of migration. How it's structured, as I said, there will be 3 pillars. First, the guarantee mechanism, that I'll explain later. Then we have a technical assistant that helps to design a tractable project to the private sector, and also then a pillar 3 policy dialogue reform. So we also provide support to create conducive environment for the private sector and the public sector and the local market to discuss together and reach a common understanding for the priorities and let's say the required frameworks to enable private sector participation. Thus, the structure will have up to 79 billion euros in guarantees, with the aim to leverage up to 130 billion euros of concessional and sub-sovereign finance in Africa alone. This, of course, will be blended with financing from European and international financing institutions, and especially in the case of Africa, hopefully with the African Development Bank. So the FSD guarantees a risk mitigation mechanism to stimulate investment in Africa and the neighborhood. It's with the aim to provide what we call it liquidity cushion, first loss share, to encourage and crowd in private investments. Who we are working with, already see a list of various international financing institutions, including the African Development Bank, that are eligible to cooperate with. It's a big list, including KFW, FMO, EBRD, EIB, African Development Bank, and others. And we have 5 investment windows, plus an open architecture window that is to be launched soon, where water, although it's not specifically mentioned as a specific window, but it falls under both the sustainable cities for water and wastewater and financing sustainable agriculture for irrigation. So as I said, our finance goes in 3 pillars to have an integrated approach. The first pillar on the guarantee plus technical assistance to prepare the projects and ensure the sound financial management. And pillar 3, to promoting a conducive environment climate and having structured dialogue with the businesses, coordination and coherence, political dialogue, and ensuring that the laws and regulations are favoring and supporting such direction. This a quick summary of some of the projects that are being implemented currently in Africa. I'll take, for example, the Sustainable Cities Investment Fund platform with EIB. This guarantee is addressing current market failures and risks that hamper investment in urban infrastructure. EFSD guarantee contribution up to 37 million euros. Total investment is expected over 370, leverage ratio 1:10. The lead financing institutions, EIB, covering regions sub-Saharan Africa and the neighborhood. And of course, they said, those who are interested could approach directly EIB. We have a similar project with ISID, Spanish, and also AFD. Okay, so what type of support we could provide? For example, in the case of PPPs, the guarantee mechanism could take the form of guaranteeing any termination payment, frequently identified a key risk of private sector, which is payable if the municipality, or what you call a triggering factor, municipality or the state fails to meet its obligation under a specific PPP contract. This could also cover political or potential lack of liquidity of the municipality or state to make short-term payment, which hampering the commitments. So the e-guarantee could cover various, let's say, cases or potential cases of the risks identified. Could also cover the FX rate risks associated. And of course, this provides, let's say, a cushion and an encouragement to the private sector to participate. Also, in what we call it sub-sovereign finance to the municipal infrastructure, the guarantee could be structured that it allows long-term commercial debt providers to be more encouraging to the sector and cover some of the risks related to collection rates, to, let's say, risks related to the collection rate or network failures. That's a quick example on a given program where the EU will provide a guarantee to the EFI. Then the EFI, in this case for an SMEs, will provide a loan with a guarantee to local banks or intermediary financial institution that in its return will provide finance to the final beneficiary. Such structure, you see that the guarantee coverage could be 40 to 50% of the risks in the first loss share. The direct beneficiaries or the direct benefits of the SMEs would be reduced collateral or improved financing terms, longer maturities. This could be a good case, for example, for the support to corporates or farmers or small and medium enterprises. This is also a case how a bank, a local bank, could be part or could apply for such guarantee through a national program, and then local banks could apply throughout directly our delegation or through the lead financing institution. And a second case might be more suitable in the desalination sector or major infrastructure, where the EU through the FSD could provide a first loss guarantee between 60 to 70%, including 10% with the skin in the game from the lead financing institution, and a second layer of guarantee to be provided by the co-financiers, and then provide a package that could cover with or without a sovereign guarantee, in this case it will not be a sovereign guarantee, to have like some sort of an independent water purchase agreement, for example, or water purchase agreement. And this would be directly financed to the private sector, not through any intermediary. In addition to that, Pillar 2 and Pillar 3 could be provided, so technical assistance, a complementary technical assistance component could be provided to support financial intermediary to building their capacities, enhance the risk management system and visibility, also to build their capacities, also to link and raise the awareness on the potential market beneficiaries and assist the connection between the program and the final beneficiary. This could be done through studies, credit facilitation, and implementation. So finally, under the Team Europe initiative, we have, as I said, as a summary, 3 pillars of control, support. Similar to what my colleague Wasila from the African Development said, that an integrated program could be provided through sovereign finance to public infrastructures, for example, to rehabilitation of the network. Then a sustainable finance, a guarantee plus mechanism, guarantee plus technical assistance and policy dialogue to support the private sector involvement in certain key priority areas. And finally, technical assistance to improve the enabling environments, revision of laws, bylaws, and ensure it's a conducive environment. This could be provided. And this is encapsulated under a Team Europe initiative that could be designed locally at a national level or at a regional level. So, of course, if someone is interested to know more information, they could check our website, check their respective delegation in their countries, or to check the NIP Secretariat and FCC Secretariat in Brussels. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your good attention. And thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
شكرا جزيلا. Between the 2 presentations of Wasila and yourself, and of course انتوا اصحاب الدكانه، فانا as a moderator مش قادر افتح بقي وهم طاحوا فينا. شكرا جزيلا. I was really honored to moderate a session with Karim Salama من أوراسكوم وعمر حسني من حسن علام, the 2 top contractors, I would say, not only in Egypt, maybe in the whole region, and to have with us كريم بدر من الصندوق السيادي اللي أنا كنت personally مشوق جدا أعرف أنتوا ناويين تعملوا إيه. To be honored to have with us Wasila من African Development Bank, to have Mr. Marcos Martinez من EBRD, and finally أيمن عياد من EU. The question, do we have time to open the floor for something like 3 hours of questions? عندنا وقت يعني؟ اوكي تمام، اتفضل. Please introduce yourself and tell us to whom you are directing your question.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. My name is Khaled Al-Zoghbi from the U.S. Embassy, Cairo, from the Foreign Commercial Services. Our mission in Egypt is to create this link between the American entities, including companies and government, and the Egyptian side in case of Egypt. And I had the chance to get in touch with Karim before in an online webinar to the American companies. And would like to share a concern. It's good to have a sovereign fund as a country, and it's a privilege to the Egyptian people and the government. However, in some cases, this could be seen by the foreign investor as governmental competition with the private sector. I'm sure Karim has a nice politically answer to this question, but I would like to hear from Omar and Karim, being a representative to the private sector on the panel, and also of Wasila could highlight on this. How do you see a sovereign fund intervention in the market, being the government trying to invest and make money out of the market as a profitable organization? Thank you.
السؤال رايح فين بالظبط؟
عمر وكريم.
اتفضل.
يعني actually having a governmental representation in a PPP project, it's common in different jurisdiction. In let's say take part of the region Abu Dhabi, usually the off-taker is part of the SPV. And it's not part of the SPV with a minority stake, it's with a majority stake. Sometimes they go up to 50%. So we see that the sovereign fund being part of the SPV of the PPP project, it's giving more credibility and making and giving more appetite for the investors to be part of this. So we see it this way. It's a positive thing at the end.
Omar.
Well, I think. Hello. I think Karim covered most of what I wanted to say, but to be honest, we see the involvement of the sovereign fund with us. We've been working together on developing several projects, and we see that their involvement, especially in projects where the boundary conditions are not very clear, brings a lot of reassurance to our partners, whether they're development partners or the financing institutions on an international level. I think it brings a lot of value and provides the reassurance that the project may lack or may not have fully covered.
Wasila.
Shukran. Hello? Yeah. Shukran. I think this is a very interesting question that probably the large and greater public is wondering itself, you know, and this is really something that came out also, I think, from the previous session. So I'll say that just recently, actually, the African Development Bank has approved funding for a sovereign fund that is going to be engaged also in infrastructure projects in Ghana. And so I'll complement, you know, the terms of my colleague from Orascom. This is actually quite a common way, and it's an interesting way to ensure that, you know, the public sector is getting something back in case the revenues are sometimes greater than what is expected. So it is a way to comfort, indeed, private investor and help hold their hand and make sure that they would be more willing to come and invest in a country. The very fact that you would have a public institution involved in the project from, you know, the concessionaire side really is a proof of confidence. But it is also really a way to ensure that there is redistribution, you know, in the profit as well. And we're seeing some very sophisticated concession agreements sometimes even, and this is a case of an ongoing project right now across the continent, where even if there are, I would say, profits that are generated through the refinancing of a project throughout the life of the contract. Don't forget, these are 25, 30 years contracts, right? So sometimes it is beneficial to refinance a contract, you know, resell the debt, get another loan, etc. And sometimes even the profits made out of this are expected to be split with in fact, the concession authority, which is a very interesting mechanism, quite sophisticated, but interesting mechanism to redistribute the revenues that are generated in a given project.
Thank you. Karim Badr.
No, I just wanted to say that the presence of the sovereign fund is not forced upon anyone. It's an option to, as my colleague said, to entice the private sector and give them comfort. But if they feel that they can do this on their own, then this is even better for us, because it will allow for more foreign direct investment to flow in and so forth. So the sovereign fund is an option, not a must.
Thank you. Thank you. تفضلي.
Thank you very much. I have a small question directed to Dr. Ayman and Mrs. Wasila. My name is Tahani Slate. I'm head of Central Department for External Cooperation in the Nile Water Sector, Ministry of Water Resources. If you have participated in this morning session in the high-level panel, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Abdelati talked about a project called VicMed project, the establishment of a navigation line between Lake Victoria and the Mediterranean Sea, which is a regional project across the Nile Basin countries. My question is, and actually we need to thank African Development Bank because they have committed part of the feasibility study phase 2 the day before yesterday in our session. So I thank you very much. But this was a part of an $11.7 million US, which are the feasibility study to this project. Now my question is to Dr. Ayman. What is the process, or how to engage the EU to complete the needed fund under the new initiative? Because actually you were talking about technical assistance, and I think that preparing feasibility studies for a project, for an infrastructure project, that is it is actually one of the PIDA PAP2 projects of the 16 transregional ones. So is there a possibility to complete this fund through the European Union, and what is the procedures needed to do it? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tahani. I believe the VicMed being a regional program covering several countries across the Nile tripartite, our INPA regional fund, or SFD fund, that is managed by the European Union delegation, the African Union, will be definitely the entity to address, either through Egyptian representation in the African Union, because given the nature of this project and this regional nature, definitely the funds under this envelope will be the case. Later on, at a second stage, if the program is ready to be financed, so the feasibility studies could be financed under, let's say, private sector participation umbrella, definitely, and of course, an interest from an international financing institution that is acknowledged by the EU. Definitely, this could be subject later on to a possible support, additional support.
Shukran. We are already half an hour late, and allow me to thank you very much all, my dear panelists and audience. And I think we can move now to the last session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.